And I hope I got everyone now, because again, like Barry, I don't see everyone who's on screen here.
Well, thanks for that, Doug. I guess we'll find out if there's any sleeper cells here on the call as we go through the presentation. So from the city staff side, JC is the planner on the file. I think we have some other city staff members as well on the line. JC, do you want to just introduce yourself?
Sure. Yeah, I'm Jean-Charles Renaud, or JC. I'm the planning file lead dealing with these applications. And I'm here tonight to mostly answer questions related to planning process as the applications make their way through City Hall.
Okay, great. And I think we have some of your colleagues on the line as well tonight. If so, just introduce yourselves in the chat, folks, because there's too many participants for me to weed you out right now. I'll just briefly state the agenda. We have, well, we've done introductions. Now we're going to move into the applicant's presentation, followed by JC is going to come and tell us where things are at in the process and next steps. And then we're going to head to representatives from OSCA, the Old Ottawa South Community Association, as well as Heron Park Community Association, to give some preliminary comments. And then we'll open it up to everyone else on the call. Okay, so with no further ado, let's hand it over to the applicant to share their screen and start the presentation. I believe all the, is it Bruno? Sorry, who started on the applicant side is going to share their screen?
I think Doug's going to share a screen. I'm just going to take a quick minute to do a quick introduction. And
Sure,
then,
you go ahead, Bruno. I'm going to make sure Doug has host powers.
Okay, and then I'll hand it over to Doug and Barrett. So okay. Thanks everyone for coming out tonight or logging in tonight. My name is Bruno Bartel. I'm with Cushman and Wakefield. We're the managers for Billings Bridge Plaza, as well as this property that we're looking to do the zoning and OP amendment for. As managers, we've been involved with Billings Bridge for the last 20 years. We manage Billings Bridge on behalf of Capital City Shopping Centre. They've been longtime owners of the shopping center. Their tenure there dates back to early 60s. So they've really seen the area evolve. They've seen the shopping center evolve. They had the opportunity probably about 15 years ago to start to assemble some of this land here at the corner of Bank and Riverside. You know, seeing the opportunity or getting themselves sort of ready for the kind of the evolution of the neighborhood, and trying to set themselves up for you know, for the next 40 years, let's say. Yeah, so with that, they've sorry, I just lost my note here. Yeah, so that's where they see it. The long-time ownership group. They've seen the area evolve. They like sort of what's happening with Bank Street. They're encouraged by the city's plans for Bank Street. They like to be part of it. Like to see what happens next. So with that, I pass that over to I'm not sure if it's Doug or Barrett that will really kind of start to take you through the project itself and give you a sense of what we're looking to do here.
So Barrett, I'm assuming you're letting me go here now. All right, I'm going to switch over to my screen share and I'm going to run you through a bit of the context for the project, some of the history that brings us to where we are, and show you what we are proposing for this site. So just on to highlight the points I'm going to cover again, context, I'm going to look a little bit about the traffic and kind of the urban street pattern, and also the how the parkway influences the site. Just really illustrate how this is a very strong site from a transportation and active transportation point of view. And then look a little bit at how the site came into kind of the situation where it's at now, being in the middle of a traffic island, and how that influences the approach we've taken for the development. and how our development is going to play into the greater City of Ottawa project for the reinvention of Bank Street. And then I'm going to go into some of the project features, the little plaza space that we're trying to create at the corner here, and creating a little bit of I guess, a place to pause or an open space when you enter into this portion of Old Ottawa South, and then look at the form that we've provided for the tower. So big picture, whoops, I skipped a slide here. Big picture, I'm sure you're all quite well familiar with where the site is. It's this little red dot right here in the center of this image. So we're just immediately to the south of Old Ottawa South, essentially to the north of Billings Bridge Plaza. Off to the west side or east side of this image here, we have the hospital. To the west side, Carleton University, and then off in the distance, Ottawa River and Gatineau Park. Looking a little bit closer, the land assembly that Cushman Wakefield has put together for this parcel includes the small medical arts building, the vacant lot at the corner, the existing restaurant building, and the menswear store, as well as their parking areas. The two little buildings to the southwest are City of Ottawa infrastructure buildings that house pumping for the site servicing for this whole neighborhood. So the site kind of wraps around them in an L bounded by Riverside eastbound, Riverside westbound, and Bank Street. And just looking at a little bit of the land use patterns around the area, really it's a pretty strong commercial area in the sense that we've got a really strong mall in terms of the diversity of services that really address the local community. Short walking distance to Old Ottawa South and the main street there. We've got medical arts buildings, and then several existing apartment buildings of various scales, small daycare, and some office space. And just to kind of look a little bit at how that looks a little bit closer up, we're right at a couple of the busiest intersections in this area of the city, that Bank Street and and Riverside Drive intersection, and then both eastbound and westbound have fairly high levels of traffic, and we appreciate that some of you here tonight are coming here to discuss concerns you have with those traffic issues, and we'll certainly get into those later on. Again, looking at just some other shots. Also really important to this site is kind of that natural context against the Rideau River and the linear park that follows along that, the whole NCC lands that go to the southwest and the northeast from this parcel. In terms of kind of the active transportation network to the sites, this image here shows your 10-minute walking distance. That's the blue line right here, and a 10-minute cycling distance from the site, as well as the rapid transit connections. And really the important thing from when we look at this from the development standpoint is the walking distance that takes you well into Old Ottawa South, covers the entirety of the mall, and then gets you into those kind of the parkway context. If you walk 20 minutes, you're into the RA center, so recreational facilities. And then within that 10-minute biking envelope, you can see that given that we're looking at a rental market, we're close to employment places like Ottawa Hospital, close to employment areas like in the Glebe. We capture Carleton University within that area, as well as the government employment lands over towards Mooney's Bay and where Canada Post is. And then LRT, of course, a little bit to the west of there, and the bus rapid transit that takes you around to downtown and connects you into the Confederation line. Historically, this little parcel of land has been quite important in the neighborhood. Originally, the intersection of Long Island Road and Prescott Road was actually a small little town in its own right, with a town hall and a store. The toll bridge that was the first Billings Bridge is shown right here on these maps and still exists on the second one from 1912. And you can see kind of a variety of different uses popping up, residential uses, some small retail stuff, and really supporting that local neighborhood. And so, you know, for the last 100 years or so, this has been a bit of a business district to the area. Significant change happened in 1915 when the current Bank Street Bridge opened. And suddenly, instead of being a toll bridge and being kind of a bit of a barrier from one side of the river to the other, it became a full public bridge and essentially became a free-flowing line of traffic across. And that really springboarded further development to the south of the river. By 1960s, we start to see the parkway system built, and then the Billings Bridge Mall also comes in early 1960s. And that starts a shift in this site, where the site that we're looking at developing now goes from being the commercial center at this particular area to that shifting over to the mall, where and all the commerce slowly starts this this movement from being in the middle of the kind of the traffic loop of the parkway over to the mall. So looking at that kind of from an aerial standpoint, prior to the mall, you can see all a little clustering of small buildings right around here on the intersection. There's some stuff along the river like the old mill, Merkley Brickyard down in the south edge here. And then by 1965, the mall is built here, the Brickyard's gone, and we're starting to see kind of the erosion of what's left of that little commercial village in the middle of the new parkway loop. And really by 1965, roughly, the road network has established as it is today. And you can see already in 1965, some of the smaller businesses have started to disappear, and the uses inside this loop here start to be more car focused. And really that's kind of how the development pattern has stayed today. The site has gone from being kind of a bit of a main street and a stopping point for people to really becoming a thoroughfare and a major traffic passage for the site. So that kind of takes us into what we're trying to do on this project in conjunction with the city's project on redoing all of Bank Street, is to try to reestablish a use within the traffic loop or that oval. And really that's kind of like we're trying to re-inhabit a bit of an island in this space in terms of providing a place for some commercial business, a place for people that people feel more comfortable walking, a place to pause, maybe sit down, have a coffee, or enjoy a little bit of time. And and ultimately a place for people to live. So the way the project is rolling out is 2 residential phases. So there's 2 towers here. We're proposing to build the south one first. That's this one right here. And then it would be followed probably several years later by this north building. And then linking those 2 buildings will be a new, what we're calling a gateway plaza. And this is a kind of a bit of an open space that's going to be accessible to the community, and also provides a bit of a marker to that entry into into Ottawa South. So rather than saying, let's build a landmark building in that location, we think that it has more potency to actually build a landscape or a landmark open space that can be given back for use to the community. So again, looking at that straight from above, with north being kind of off to the top left side of this image, you can see the footprints of the first building here with some commercial units facing onto Bank Street. That widened out right-of-way for Bank Street, providing more space for new cycle tracks and wider sidewalks, as well as some planting. The lobbies of the buildings facing off to either side of this this new plaza space here. All the parking except for a small amount of visitor parking goes to below grade in 2 levels of parking garage. The entrance to that being right at this location. All the garbage collection and all that also comes off of Bank Street and onto this plaza area, so that we're not interrupting traffic or adding more kind of congestion to that point of Bank Street. And I think also important to note on this is that through the development of this project, there was actually a reduction in the number of laneways entering off of Bank Street from the current situation. So that means less curb cuts going across sidewalks and going across the cycle tracks than there will be or than there is right now. Just really high level, this represents the typical cross section that the city is moving towards for this section of Bank Street. So if we imagine that this looking south, this right side being what we're proposing, space for trees, sidewalk, cycle track, small boulevard area, and then 4 lanes of traffic. What we're proposing is switching the trees and the sidewalk so that the trees will be between the cycle track and the sidewalk. Those things are still in, I guess, design negotiation with the city, but we have space for each of those 3 elements. From an architectural standpoint, what we're proposing is what's classically called the tower or podium and tower building. So a lower podium, really kind of to establish a bit of a lower scale edge, something that's creates a nice strong street edge with some similarities to some of the more urban streets. Like if we looked a little bit further up Bank Street, that creates essentially a strong facade and kind of will take the street from feeling kind of like a more suburban thoroughfare to feeling more like an urban street that you would find. We see this project as being part of an urban transformation on the site. And then again, on this side, we see into that public plaza that's going to be created right at the corner of Riverside and Bank. Looking above that public plaza, so it's about 600 meters square, a little bit more than that kind of in green space, and then a little bit of that visitor parking area, and also setting up for the entrance of the parking garage and deliveries and loading and everything off of the street edge. And then that's a new cycle track, the wider sidewalk, and that planted median or boulevard along the side of Bank Street. So really a totally reinvented Bank Street edge there. For the public plaza space, or the Gateway Plaza, we're kind of in an ideas level or point of it. And really, I think as the project develops, we're going to look at whether or not there might be some sort of element in there that draws people in or provides, or I guess reinforces that as kind of this gateway focal point into Ottawa South. So I'm just showing a few ideas of things that have been done in other places, ideas like viewing towers of sorts, or a real like landscape pathway, similar to what was done where there's a linear park at the High Line in New York, although not elevated in this case. Again, another shot of that public plaza, and then those podiums that kind of set up that urban edge along Bank Street, along Riverside. And a view above that, again, so Bank Street over here, Riverside is just below where where I'm looking from. And really, idea again is to create a bit of a space to pause and to really kind of help support some of the commercial uses in there, provide some amenity space for the people who live in these buildings, and then also provide a little bit of, I guess, an attraction or a place for people who are passing by the site to enjoy. So looking a little bit at these 2 buildings. So again, we've got a podium form, we've got a narrow or setback tower, kind of in the range of 750 meters of gross floor area. And then some articulation on the top to create some space for rooftop terrace and also to screen mechanical units. Some examples of buildings like that, the top 3 are buildings that we've done that many of you are probably familiar with. The Rideau at Lansdowne Park, Nuovo near Preston Street, and then a new project that was just completed a year ago as part of a 3-tower, or actually 4-tower project at the Blair Transit Station for RioCan. And then there's some images here on the bottom of other kind of multi-phase urban renewal projects out of Calgary, East Village in both of these cases. Looking at our project from the east, so on Riverside westbound or southbound, depending on where you were at on Riverside. This ghosted in form here in front is the other project that's currently proposed across the street. And looking at a project from the west. As part of the study for this project, we've also looked at the sun shadow impacts. One of the benefits this site has is that it's fairly well separated from any neighborhoods to the west and to the north by the river and green space. And to the east, we have other fairly high, tall buildings. And so that position being further away from other existing buildings minimizes the sun shadow impacts. This one here looks at March, really looking at a few days ago, and September, and then also looking at it in June. Both of these images are available as part of the application package on the City of Ottawa website. And that kind of takes me through to the end of my presentation. I'll just roll back to an image to leave it on. In a moment. And I guess I'll turn it over to Barrett for some comments. Would you like the screen up there, Barrett, or you want me to take it?
I'll end up sharing my own in just a moment.
Great.
You can leave it for now. Just set this up here. There we go. Everyone can see that? Give me a head nod. Perfect. All right. Thanks a lot for that, Doug. That was a great overview of the site context, the history, and the proposal itself. And Bruno as well, giving us that background with the ownership. So my name is Barrett Wager. I'm a planner with Stantec Consulting, and I'm working on this project for Cushman and Wakefield. Currently, we have two applications which are put forward, one being an official plan amendment, the other being a zoning bylaw amendment. Before you'll ever see, I guess, a shovel in the ground or anything, even if those approvals go as planned, the site will still have to go through a process known as site plan control approval. And I imagine JC from the city will touch on that a bit after this. So just to give you a little context. So for my presentation, I've got a rather short slide deck, but what I'd like to do is kind of go over, starting from a high level, dealing with the supporting policies for this proposal, all the way down to the finite details, which would be the site specific stuff. So that would bring us into the zoning material. And then from there, just give everyone an overview of exactly what it is that we're looking to amend with the official plan and the zoning bylaw. And then we'll turn it over to JC and then over to a question period, I believe. So starting at that very high level, with planning in Ontario, there's a document known as a provincial policy statement. And so this applies across the entire province. So it's a very high level document. And within it has certain policy objectives to achieve, in the case with this proposal, a healthy and strong community. So anytime you're looking at residential mixed use development, such as what we're proposing here, that's one of the main pillars or policy objectives that the province has. And to do that, it has a number of different, let's call them sub-objectives. So you've got looking to achieve an efficient development pattern. So we're talking about compact build form, looking to ensure you're providing an adequate supply and variety in housing options. So some developments coming in with rental options, others for freehold ownership. And then one of the key ones, which we hear more and more of these days, especially with the new official plan coming up, is transit supportive density. And that's often tied in with the term intensification. And so it's our responsibility through this development approvals process, especially when looking to seek amendments to the official plan or zoning bylaw, to demonstrate that what we're proposing is consistent with the policy objectives of this document. This is sort of our starting ground as planners. And so with this proposal that we're discussing tonight, we demonstrate that consistency, which is required by providing an appropriate desirable renewal of assembled and serviceable land within a node that the city has identified for intensification. So as Doug had mentioned, we're in proximity to substantial transit infrastructure. We have ample opportunity with open space nearby along the Rideau River, the green space there, complementary land uses. We have the Billings Bridge Shopping Plaza just to the southwest. We have Carleton University nearby, Confederation Heights, employment node, hospital campuses. So where we're located is the exact type of area that you want to introduce high density residential use. So going from the provincial policy statement, which is that highest level of policy direction, which applies all across the province, we then get into municipal specific policy, and that's where the official plan comes into play. Most cities all have them. The City of Ottawa is currently going through a complete rewrite of their official plan, which in this case does not apply as it's not in full force and effect yet. There's still quite a bit of things to be worked through with that. But under today's current official plan, the land use designation for our site is mixed use center. So this designation is intended for essentially the highest densities and mixes of uses within the city, and they're typically located in proximity to transit. So if you look at the purpose statement, which I've pulled right from the official plan, you'll see it says, these centers are a critical element in the city's growth management strategy, being areas with potential to achieve high densities and compact mixed use development oriented to transit. What this typically translates to is more jobs and housing. Obviously, there's a housing shortage across the city. And by introducing, around 550, 60 new rental units, this is the ideal situation for this location. So then within the official plan, there are subsidiary plans, or what's known as secondary plans. And these are essentially a method to take the parent official plan and adapt it to a site-specific context or an area-specific context. And in this case, we have the Bank Street secondary plan. And this came into effect in 2012 after substantial work with the community, the councillor's office, and many other stakeholders through the community design process. And the Bank Street secondary plan is an adopted policy document within the official plan. And much like the mixed use center objectives for this site, it has a lot of the same directives. So as a node, which is the same designation here, it's identified as an appropriate location for mid to high rise mixed use buildings. It goes on to speak of elements of architecture to accentuate that prominent gateway of this area of the city, being that separation between Old Ottawa South to the north and coming into the new community to the south. So again, it's our job, our purpose is to ensure that we conform with these policies, which we feel we've certainly demonstrated through our submissions. Then when you go down from the official plan, then you get into regulatory documents such as the zoning bylaw. And this is where you get into the site-specific details of what's permitted on a site. So we're talking land use types, we're talking about building heights, setbacks, all of those details, which I'm sure everyone here is familiar with. And with our existing zoning, currently the site is zoned as AM8, and that's known as Arterial Main Street Subzone 8. So this zoning is quite common throughout the city for streets with a similar capacity and character as Bank Street. One of the distinguishing features of an arterial main street compared to a traditional main street is that you can truly visually see the difference when you cross the bridge. When you cross over to the north into Old Ottawa South, the designations turn to traditional Main Street zoning, and that's more characteristic of your low-rise mixed-use buildings, ground-oriented, trying to generate as much activity as possible and vibrancy on the street front. So although we don't have that same zoning, we still are technically a main street. And with the city's plans for the Bank Street renewal, and with our plans on this site and the plans of the proponent to the east, we're looking at as much opportunity as possible to carry that vibrancy and that streetscape character down from Old Ottawa South and try to kind of enliven the street, especially at that corner where we have the plaza. So when you look at the purpose of this zone outside of the explanation I provided, word for word in the bylaw, is to accommodate a broad range of uses, primarily in mixed use buildings, all of which helps to promote intensification. So again, the main feature about these AM zones is the fact that they have the capacity to support transit and other aspects which will allow for intensification to move forward. So now that I've kind of gone over that high to low level policy framework summary, we get into, well, what's actually being changed with our official plan designation on our site and with our zoning, and why does it need to be changed to accommodate the proposal. So it's not the actual parent official plan document, which we are amending. It's the secondary Bank Street plan, which is being amended. And that plan was, like I had mentioned, was published in 2012. So in the planning world, it's actually quite dated at this point. We're going through our new official plan process right now, and a lot has changed. We have a new provincial policy statement, which is that document I showed at the beginning of the slides. That's changed since then. The previous version was from 2014. So with LRT coming in as well, there's quite a bit going on throughout the city, and all of that points towards more opportunity to bring in intensification that's compatible and that fits well in areas where transit can be supported. So the purpose behind the actual amendments, which we're requesting, are all site and proposal specific details, which will allow for a more appropriate building form and essentially placement of building mass on the site. So the four key items within the official plan amendment is to increase the maximum permitted building height to 106 meters, which is approximately 34 stories, to provide a more appropriate distribution of the permitted mass on the site. And just to give that a little more detail, so if we were to build what is permitted under the current official plan and zoning today, and I believe, this is kind of more of an architect's exercise with massing distribution, but essentially you could create one big, ugly, ground-oriented building that consumes almost the entirety of the site. And that's just to give you a bit of context. Of course, that's not desirable for anyone. So the approach is to break up that mass, have smaller floor plates for the buildings, have the building broken up itself into a podium, a center, and a top, all of which Doug had previously gone through. So the second point for the amendment to the secondary plan is to remove the maximum floor space index to align the site's existing zoning regulation for FSI. So the current zoning for the site does not require or does not have a maximum floor space index. And what this means is your floor space index is how much development can be accommodated on the site. So if you have a maximum floor space index of 1, that means you could technically build 1 story high for the entirety of your property. If it's 3, that would be 3 stories high for the entire property. And so in our situation, the zoning allows for or has no maximum FSI. And so our request is basically to just have the secondary plan reflect that. The third item is to remove minimum required percentage of building wall along Bank Street. So what this is it's a policy within the secondary plan that is aimed at making sure that any new development along Bank Street in this area ensures that the buildings front onto the street. We don't want to see all sorts of front yard parking. We don't want to see all sorts of gaps within the street. And what we're providing exactly is buildings fronting Bank Street, with the exception of one curb cut to allow for vehicle access on Bank, and then the public plaza at the corner. So that's really the driving force behind requiring that amendment. And then the final one is to amend the required building podium step backs. And what this is, essentially the policy states that you have to have a step back of your podium at either the second, third, or fourth floor. We're proposing ours at the fifth floor for the South Tower. And we feel that this is much more appropriate than second, third, or fourth, given the context. Bank Street, once it's renewed, will have a fairly wide right-of-way. And typically, the design direction when trying to work with these podiums is to match the podium height with the width of the right-of-way. It's a general rule of thumb, and that's to help encourage that human scale along the street. So that addresses everything that gets captured under the official plan amendment. Now, in going to the zoning bylaw amendment, there are a few items which get repeated because they're reflected in both documents. And then there are a few others which are new, which I'll go through. So the first one is the increase in maximum permitted building height to 106 meters, same as with the official plan. The second is more of, it's not so much asking for relief of any sort from the zoning, but we would like to reassign the lot lines so that Bank Street is considered the front yard. This is really just a technical matter. The city's zoning bylaw defines the front yard as the shortest of the yards with street frontage. And that, in our case, we just don't see that as being appropriate for a site which has its full length along Bank Street, which is exactly where the activity is to be drawn. So we'd like to reassign that as the front yard. No minimum or maximum required setbacks for any lot lines. Now, this off the bat sounds like a dramatic request, but if you look at the zoning today, there are essentially no minimum setback requirements for the site or maximums. I believe there are one or two for each. And we would essentially be varying those by about 1.5 meters, which in the grand scheme of things is negligible. So just for the sake of having a consistent and clean, let's say, sheet to work with before we get to site plan approval, we figured it would make most sense to remove those few minimums and maximum setbacks. Then the next is no minimum required setback from a water course. Again, this is somewhat of a technical one. There's a zoning requirement in the bylaw for being 30 meters setback from the normal high water mark of a water course. We are just marginally within that for our building. And so that's really just mostly a technical matter, since we do have Riverside, which cuts right across between us and the river. And to add a bit more to that, we have received comments back from the Rideau Valley Conservation Authority, which are the primary agency to comment on those types of matters. And there were no concerns with that. The next point is to remove minimum required percentage of building street wall along Bank Street. So the same thing as what was discussed over with the official plan amendment about adding the plaza. So that to allow for the plaza, we need to go through that amendment. Then reduce the required landscaping buffer width around the parking stalls adjacent to Bank Street. So there's only a small number of parking which is going to be provided at grade, and it's been internalized to the site. However, there is about a 0.5 meter deficiency on the landscaping on the north side. It's very minor. So again, it's just something that makes sense to bundle into the rezoning. And then lastly, to introduce site-specific zoning schedule for regulating building step backs. So what this is it's essentially a map. which would be tied to the zoning approval of the site. So if the site were to be rezoned, it would be any development on the site would need to comply with this map. And that map details where certain portions of a building is allowed to go. So if you think of a wedding cake, it somewhat has that same effect in that you can only build so wide out on the podium, and then you have to go up, and then the setback requirements bring you into the next portion of the building. And this is to provide a level of comfort, knowing that if all of this is approved, that you're not going to see a drastically different plan pop up, which does not fit within the intended building form that we're proposing. So that goes over everything that I wanted to touch on. And I think now we're either going to hand it over to JC, the city file lead, and then over to Q&A.
I'll just jump in really quickly before JC starts. Thanks for that overview. There's a couple of things I just wanted to make sure we highlight. So just to make it as clear as possible, the official plan amendment is required for this through the secondary plan, but it's still an official plan amendment, and it's increasing the maximum height to 106 meters. Currently on the site, it's 50 meters that are allowed, which is about 16 stories. So be more than a double increase in the height that was planned for the area. And it's important to recognize that under the planning rationale, there's kind of 4 factors you need to look at. One is the impact of the surrounding area that gets assessed comprehensively. And of course, in this area, traffic issues are a huge concern, affordable housing, huge concern. The transition from the bridge is a big concern. The direction in the policy needs to be met, so that denser development often means taller buildings should be located in areas that support rapid transit. And of course, this is within, I think, 400 meters of that transit station at Billings Bridge, close to it anyway. And in an inclusionary zoning concept, that means you got to have affordable housing. That's not in yet in the city, but big consideration here. The other one is an important one, is that there needs to be an identified community amenity. And in this case, the developer is talking about a community amenity as the small parkette that they've talked about. So although that type of thing would be welcome, it does appear to be fairly weak in terms of community benefits. So we're really going to have to do a lot of work together to make sure that there are tangible community benefits if this type of some of the height increases is being allowed, and what those would be. So I just want to make those things clear before I pass it over to JC as well. I think Barrett had a good presentation on all of the different amendments that are required, and there is a lot being requested here, but some of them are more consequential than others, as he has pointed out. So I appreciate that overview. Just want to clarify a couple of points there. So JC, I'll pass it over to you on the process, and then we'll get to questions and answers. Or no, then we're going to get to the community association leads, and then to Q&A. Excuse me. Go ahead, JC.
All right. Thank you, Councillor. Thanks, Miles, for unmuting me. All right, I'll keep it very brief and just go through the bullet points relating to the planning process here with these applications. So as it was already stated, the applications that have been submitted are for official plan amendment and a zoning bylaw amendment. Now, a site plan control application will be required, but it has not been applied for, or an application hasn't been made at this point. So far, the file has been circulated. Those of you within 120 meters have received a notice of the applications and invite you to comment. And I've received many comments from many of you. You may have also seen some signs posted on the property. So the circulation period has now ended, but as always, I'm still open to receiving comments. I'm not going to ignore these at this point, but as it's logical. The sooner I do receive comments, the better it's going to be for me to summarize them and send them back to the applicant. So the next step for me will be to send this summary of comments that I've received to the applicant, along with comments from planning and other city departments. A response from the applicants to these comments will be required in order for the file to move along. Now, the overall objective here will be to work with the applicant to get to a point where staff is comfortable with the proposal, at which point the applications would be brought forward to planning committee, who will then make a recommendation to council. And as Barrett has alluded to already, so what we're looking to achieve here is an understanding of what the limitations on the site are going to be, and we're going to end up with an idea of what the massing should be, the height, the setback, the step backs, and things like that. And I'm just saying this to address some of the comments that I've seen fly by in the chat here, things like wind studies and bird-friendly design. Those are very important to us, but are things that we will be looking to see at future stages when we get to details of site plan control. So by all means, provide comments such as those at this point, but just so that you know, those types of nitty-gritty details would be looked at a future date. And I will press enter now so that you will have my email address. Oh, I saw somebody else already did so, but here it is again. So if you want to send me emails, go right ahead concerning this application, hopefully.
I do that often just to say hi to JC, so you can do that too, maybe if you want. Thank you, JC. That was very helpful and succinct. Thanks for being quick on that. And JC's a great planner that we get to work with on a number of files, so appreciate that. I think, Miles, we're going to community associations now. Did you do? I saw Linda Gamma-Pinto here and Susan as well. Do we have a setup for who's going to be up?
It's whatever you like. We can go to Linda and Susan first.
Okay.
Linda, how about Linda first?
Heron Park, and I think Mike's on the call too. So Heron Park, who's ever representing Heron Park tonight, did you want to speak first on this one?
Why doesn't Mike go first? I secede the screen to Mike first, and I might follow up with a question after Mike.
Sorry, I didn't see.
Thanks,
Mike
everyone.
Mike,
there he is.
Yeah, hopefully you can hear me. Actually, I would love if Linda went first. I just have a crying baby to deal with for about 5 minutes. It's just the wrong time for me. And Linda and anyone else from Heron Park is going to be fantastic at this, but I do have a couple questions when they're done. So I'll come back.
Okay, Linda, did you want to go ahead?
Thank you. Thank you very much for that presentation, both the applicant as well as Jean-Charles, JC, merci beaucoup. So where I'm starting from is really from the secondary plan. As you indicated in the earlier remarks, a lot of community effort went into the consultation and the development of these secondary plans. Yes, albeit it was 2012. I was alive at that time, so it doesn't seem that long ago to me, particularly since no development really has occurred on this land. So despite the fact that this was 12 years ago, this is the first substantial piece of development that has come forward. So, we'd really like, from our perspective, jumping from notional maximums of 16 stories to 34 stories is huge. Jumping from projected height restrictions along the river of 8 stories to 34 stories is huge. And I'm not seeing a lot of rationalization or reasons why we go from 8 or 16 to 34. The secondary plan calls for buildings possibly of greater than 16 stories closer to the transitway, at the far end of the Billings Bridge property. And that would seem, reasonable. But to start off, so let me stop here. My concern is that if we start off at the river edge with 34, what can we possibly expect at the inner side where the plan was proposing much taller buildings? Are we going to see 54-story buildings being proposed at the inside, closer to the transitway? The community accepts the principle of intensification. We have supported intensification within our boundaries, but to go from a one-story building or two-story buildings on in the Ottawa South area to 34 stories is a tremendously large magnitude of increase that I'm not sure that my neighbors would support. And I've seen the comments, and my neighbors are somewhat aghast at that level of intensification. So that's kind of where I'm going to stop. I will be sending comments into you, JC, with respect to that. But I would, again, just to underline, we put in all this work in the secondary plan, and it seems to be being tossed out without any effort to even come close to it. The last other point, it kind of seems like the applicant is using elements of the Main Street design and then, bringing to serve their ends, to bring the front of the buildings close, etc., and then jettisoning it for this 34-story height wish. That's all for me for now. Thank you. Susan, did you want to step in?
Can you hear me?
Yep.
Here I am. Thanks, Linda. I think you covered the main points. I wanted to just add, when I was looking over the proposal, and especially the submission and the page that talked about the changes that would be necessary to the zoning, and the words like removal of the floor space index requirement, minimum percentage of building walls along Bank Street, setbacks to the property line, minimum setbacks to the water course. Like, when we're talking about removing those kinds of things, that causes a red flag to go up for me, primarily because it just opens the door to pretty well anything. We have restrictions for a reason. And as Linda had mentioned, we have done a lot of work in order to try to accommodate growth in a way that is reflective of the community's needs. And so I'm just very concerned, because I know that our experience with the Committee of Adjustments and even smaller contractors going in for what's considered minor adjustments, minor modifications to expand the realm of what's currently permitted, has dramatic consequences in our community. And we have to live with the externalities associated with what people consider to be minor actually turn out to be major problems for our community. So I have an issue, or I have concern with respect to removing the language of removing all of those things. Perhaps we can look at language with respect to limiting, maybe expanding, but limiting, having some sort of limits with respect to that. And then the other issue I wanted to raise was I didn't notice anything with respect to affordable housing. And that's you know, our city has identified that as a major crisis, and we in our community have seen developments, smaller developments, much smaller developments, except for the development that's at the corner of Bank and Heron, go in, and the housing isn't affordable. And so it's not helping with that issue. And so we'd like to see at least some portion of this be designated for affordable housing, to make sure that the issue is being addressed in a small way within our community. Mike, are you on the line? I guess he's not on the line.
Maybe we can go to the.
Hi, sorry, I am here. I just required unmuting from the admin.
Had a slow trigger finger. Sorry, Mike.
All right,
I
I
just
just
make
sat
one more
down.
comment. One more comment. When I reviewed the documents on shadowing, the images were really tiny. So even with sort of blowing them up on my computer screen, I wasn't able to see. It seemed to me, and maybe one of the folks can clarify, that the park that is being proposed tends to be in shadow the majority of the day. It doesn't matter what season you're in. There doesn't seem to be, I don't know, more. To me, it didn't seem to be more than 2 hours of sunlight at any given time. I could be wrong because the images were not very big, so that I couldn't really make them out. But that would be a concern.
Okay, so hopefully the proponent is writing down these questions. We're going to go to Mike, and then we'll get them to answer some of those questions, and then we'll move on to Old Ottawa South.
That's great. So I trust that we had a good conversation when I was away about the height being higher than a secondary plan makes room for, which was, I mean, before my time, but it's not very long ago. My main concerns right now are with the ground level interaction with the rest of the community. The entrance off Bank for the parking lot, I'm not a big fan of. I know there are several curb cuts right now in that section of Bank, and there are 4 separate property parcels part of this application. So I do understand that having 1 cut is less than 4, but those current cuts aren't used very regularly, whereas the main parking lot entrance and egress, at least in this one direction, is going to get used a lot. And, you know, we're so close to getting a much better Bank Street for cycling and walking. To have a high frequency curb cut here is not great to see. I would love for the developer to reconfigure this site to maybe use Riverside in both directions. I know it gets tight on that eastbound lane, but I'd really hope that you could take another look at that and change that, because that's going to be unpleasant. It's going to be slow for everyone entering and exiting anyway. And it creates a driveway right where you're having a big pedestrian focus. And I think if you didn't have that driveway there, if you didn't have 10 visitor parking spots at grade, that you could improve the amenities for people at the ground level who are walking, who are cycling to and from the site, which is what I really want to see, and I think is going to really bring a lot of improvement to that area. We know there's tons of cars. I don't care if there are more cars being added because of this building, because there's already a limited capacity on the road. So we're pretty close to that at rush hour anyway, pre-COVID. And there, I mean, the mall's right there anyway, so there's huge car traffic in and out. I know we're pressed for time, so I wanted to say those are my main concerns, trusting, of course, that the height problems were already mentioned. I thank you for your time.
Thanks, Mike. Good comments. Okay, so Doug, do you want me to go to you or Barrett, or who's going to be taking the questions?
I can take a run through commenting on some of the ones that I've recorded down here, and some of them I'm going to pass off to other people on the team as well. So what I'll do is I'll kind of separate those out. And I think there's one that I'm going to push back to Bruno to comment, and that is on the rental mix and the affordability portion. But I am happy to address some of the other ones I've seen come up on the chat. Jean-Charles already talked about the wind studies and the bird safe studies. Those are both part of the site plan control. We will be required to do wind studies with this in addition to the noise studies. And those will be done by, we've already got Gradient Wind Engineering working on those. Bird safe design is now part of the site plan review process. So we'll be paying special attention to the glass surfaces, particularly those within the first 3 to 4 stories of the ground and within the height of the tree canopy. On this site, as a few of you have noticed, it's particularly important because we're a river fronting site, and there's definitely a fair amount of wildlife on that site. And so we want to make sure that we're being responsible with the building we design there in terms of the impact it has to those birds. The question regarding the flood zone, the property is not in the flood zone. Now, the flood zone is immediately to the east and to the west of the property, but the actual parcel that we're looking at is above the flood zone height. What we will be doing, though, is constructing a below-grade parking structure, which will go below the water table of the river. And of course, that will demand particularly careful design consideration to ensure that the water stays on the outside of the parking garage. So we'll be looking to our geotechnical engineers and our mechanical engineers to ensure that that parking garage works correctly. This is something we've done on several other projects in Ottawa, one at, well, sections of Lansdowne Park. The long-term care facility across the street from Lansdowne Park also has a parking facility below the water level. And there's several other buildings in Ottawa that have a similar situation. So it's a technical challenge, but one that can be addressed through correct design. The question of affordability, again, I'll leave that one for Bruno to answer after. There was a question whether or not we had retail on the ground floor. The intent right now is to have retail facing Bank Street. We still have a bit of a question among the design team whether or not there's any opportunity or viability of having any retail on the side that faces Riverside, so that's not defined yet. Walkability to Old Ottawa South and to Bank Street. We're fortunate in that this project coincides with roughly with the timing of the City of Ottawa's reconstruction of Bank Street. And so that means improved sidewalks and cycle tracks, basically from the Riverside Drive at the river all the way down to close to the Home Depot. And so as part of our project, the city will be taking what they call a road widening. So they're taking land development property away from the parcels that we're designing on to create additional space to allow that planted boulevard, the cycle tracks, and improved sidewalks. Right now, the road's quite constrained, particularly in front of the Mongolian hot pot restaurant and the menswear shop. And so the new building where it's constructed is actually going to be back several more meters from that to create that additional space. And that actually ties into one of the comments Barrett had about some of the reductions in setbacks. And we're asking for some minor adjustments to setbacks related to the fact that we are forced to give up, or we're giving up property to allow the improvement to that road section. We had a question about the
actually, Doug, I'm just gonna pause you there if that's okay. Yep. So I want to do the question. Great, you're going through the chat questions. We'll do that, but I want to stick to the community association questions first. Then we're going to go to Old Ottawa. Sure. Then we're going to get into the broader questions. So the specific questions I heard from the community association were height and why the double, more than the doubling, and are you wedded to pushing forward with that 34 and 31 that you've got there? And the other question that I heard specifically was around the curb cuts and what your view is on the extra curb cuts and the frequency of use that'll be going into that facility. And the other one was around the shading of the parquet. So if you can get to those three, then I think we'll move to keep moving on here.
Okay, sounds good. I will start with the parquet question, the shading of that. We positioned the parkette so that it would have kind of the greatest interface with the busiest kind of pedestrian environment. So that put it on Bank Street and on the intersection of the multi-use pathway. In terms of the shadowing, there's essentially 3 windows of time per day when the majority of that park gets sunlight. First of all, it's when the sun is coming up between or kind of over top of Bank Street, so late morning. There's a gap early afternoon as well between the 2 buildings when sun also falls on that park. And then late in the day, basically from 4 o'clock on, the north edge where the trees are located also falls under in the sun. And we figured that's actually works quite well because we've put the landscape portion of that into the area that gets the most sun and also the area where the trees are. And we've kept kind of the parking and the loading portion into the more shaded area, thinking that's going to be the part that people are going to be less likely to want to spend time in. In regards to the driveways, early in the project, we had looked at trying to have basically an egress drive onto Riverside North or eastbound, depending on how you look at it, I guess. And the issue with that is that the city, well, actually, it's not just the city, it's the engineering guidelines for driveways on this type of street determine a minimum distance from an intersection. And the City of Ottawa was not supportive of having any type of driveway onto that portion of Riverside Drive. And so because of the kind of the distance from the 2 major intersections, we had very little location where we could have that driveway other than essentially in the middle of the block on Bank Street, and then the second one exiting onto Riverside westbound. So that's why it's where it is. And then the other half of that question, I guess, was regarding the surface parking. I think one of the things that everyone's noticed as a result of COVID-19 in particular was a really rapid shift to delivery services, and that kind of coincides with the rapid adoption of Uber and ride sharing. And so we're seeing a need for some short-term convenience parking that is readily accessible at grade and next to the doors of buildings to support those types of services. So your UPS and your in telecom parcel delivery from Amazon, your Uber to pick you up. Even if the longer term visitor parking is going to be below grade, you still need a certain number of kind of rapid turnover spaces that are in a location that the people who are stopping for 5 minutes to pick up or drop off can get to and get out of really easily. So that's driving the small number of parking spaces we have on the ground level or at grade on this project. I think, and then the big one on there, I guess, was the question of height. So the question of height is, or height and density, I guess. There's kind of 2 parts to this question. So first of all, the zoning envelope allows us to construct a building that's 50 meters high or 16 stories high. So when we started looking at this project, we looked at, what could we do within, I guess, within that property parcel and within the height, and and what sort of density of building did that define? So we looked at kind of an L-shaped building initially, filling up, basically creating a big podium across the whole site. And then we had kind of 3 small towers on top of it. And that we could fit all within the zoning envelope. The problem with that building was that it was brutal. It had a really, really big impact on the street. Like, we would have put Bank Street into shadow for most of the day. It was a really, really huge building. So from an architectural standpoint, we had 2 really big problems with that. One, it would have required building the whole thing all in one shot, which is a really large undertaking in Ottawa. I think the conventional wisdom in the Ottawa market is there's kind of a cap number of units that you can build in one shot in a building that can be kind of absorbed and also handled by our construction capacities. So we wanted to break the building up into something that could be constructed in 2 separate phases. And we also wanted to create something that provided some more breathing room or articulation on the street edge. So what we did was we took that density that we could achieve in that podium and 3-tower building, and we shifted it around. So rather than, you know, saying, oh, we've got to go higher so that we can build more, we said, let's go higher so we can build less on the ground plane. Create that open space, that the plaza at the corner, give the buildings a little bit more breathing room. And so that's why we're coming forward asking for additional height on this site. It's not because we want to build more on the site, it's because we want to build better on the site.
Okay, thank you for going through those answers. We're getting incredible questions and comments in the chat. Really excellent inquiries and comments. So thank you for that. We're going to save all those, so we'll have them and refer back to them over the course of the next several months in the negotiations, because this is going to be a negotiation. It doesn't just work that a developer comes and says, this is what we're getting and what we want. No, there needs to be something back for community here, and so far we're not seeing those benefits yet, but that needs to come. So things like the Billings Bridge, it's an unsafe bridge. The collisions in this area, we have a ton of collisions here. As I mentioned before, that you can't just put up a new building and have those curb cuts happen without danger for people in this area, and so there's a risk here. We're lucky in that Doug Vandenham is here from Hoban, because they're also the ones working on the other side, that large building. So there needs to be some, you know, congruity here, congruence with what they're doing. And I think that nice to have the same architecture firm working on it. But I think they also know there needs to be a lot of negotiation in how this works. This is a huge, huge give for the city and potential huge profit for this developer. And we need to make sure that there's a large community benefit here as well. So with that, I'm going to go to Old Ottawa South. I think we're going to start with Laura Chega, if you can start, and then I believe we've got Carol as well. Laura, please go ahead.
Okay, we are now unmuted. Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for hosting this, Sean and Miles, and I certainly appreciate all of the more detailed explanations on the project. I think we should start with the idea of the secondary plan and the need for intensification. So yes, this is close to Billings Bridge. Yes, this calls for a higher density than we might have elsewhere. I think that these ideas were considered when the secondary plan was put in place. 8 years isn't really that long. The city is bringing forward into the new official plan. It's bringing forward all of the secondary plans that are less than 10 years old. So in theory, this one as well will be brought forward. Doubtless there will be some amendments along the line and some amalgamation of some of the secondary plans for the new official plan. But anything younger than 10 years is being brought forward. Interestingly, at a presentation on the new official plan that was held last week by the city planning group, the planning staff was careful to mention secondary plans as something that communities can rely on to bring certainty in planning to communities, or at least a level of certainty. I think that Heron Park and Alta Vista and the communities that worked on this secondary plan and worked hard and for a number of years were certainly looking at increasing that certainty through this plan. That's one of the reasons why the doubling of the height is a concern. Also, not just the height, but the increase in density that height engenders. This site is essentially on a traffic loop, and I think that that's something that needs to be considered as people come on and off of that site. I think my co-chair Carol will be speaking a bit more towards that. I think there's also to be something to be said for the idea in the secondary plan as it exists for a diminution of height, with the greatest heights happening closer to Billings Bridge and closer to the transitway. And I think there's an urban planning argument to be made for a diminution of height as you reach the river. And you know, to somehow come down as you hit that nice long linear park, which brings us, to shadowing, as the day goes round. What happens there. I noticed that the shadow analysis is for, I think, March and June. I believe the requirements are for June, and then either September or March. I think the equinox makes similar shadows for both of those, although they may be a bit longer in September. And then for December, which isn't included in this at all, I suspect the shadows would be, of course, even longer there. So I think that, that's something that should be looked at as a more complete shadow analysis, so we can see it all year round. And so I think that certainly that considering the idea that the height should come down as we come to the river is an important one, and that as it was envisioned in the secondary plan that exists now. And, coming down towards the river and making that a pleasant walking experience as people walk and cycle and come by. Again, the density, what I think is just an incredible increase in density on that particular property from what it is now, and what the infrastructure that is there can hold, is something that needs to be looked at very carefully. And in terms of the podium, if the building is indeed going to be 31 or 34 stories, then I would agree that a higher podium makes more sense in terms of the look of the building. If the building were lower, as I believe it should be, considering the site that it's on, then perhaps that podium could come down in response to the proportions of that building if it were provided. I think that's it for now. Thank you so much.
Okay, great comments. Maybe we'll go to Carol, and then we'll have the proponent respond. Go ahead, Carol.
Yep. Hi, Sean. I don't think I'm up yet.
We can hear you.
Yep. Okay. Thanks. Thanks, Sean and Miles, and thank you, the applicant, for the presentation. I'm just commenting briefly on the transportation. I know we haven't had a member of the applicant's team talk about transportation yet, but many of the comments received from the community have been about the intensification, which will result in many more people transiting through Ottawa to south and into Billings Bridge, both in cars, bikes, and pedestrian traffic. I see from the chat line there's quite a lot of comments about this. The intersections are difficult for all of those groups. We've had accidents at those corners, and there is the question of the in and out of this particular building. There's somebody commented, how would you, if you were traveling north on Bank, how would you get onto the site? You would in fact have to travel east before you went west. But that may not be clear to many Uber drivers who I can see doing U-turns in the middle of Bank Street. This will not make it a very safe for anybody. So it's the number of people that will be traveling through is an issue. I think this whole site needs to be looked at from a transportation point of view with both sides of the of Bank Street. I know that the applications are separate for the one for the other side of Bank, but I would urge the city to look at both applications and not look at them individually from a transportation point of view, because there's a tremendous amount of concern about the safety of everybody around this site and moving, and we certainly don't want any more accidents. It is a high accident site at Bank and Riverside, I think both east and west, and it will be very difficult for pedestrians and cyclists once the complete street is done, because while you can still bike, you'll be able, when it's done, you'll be biking along, but then once you get to Billings Bridge, the actual bridge, I think your bike lane will essentially disappear. So it's the connectivity, I don't think it's there at the moment, and I think that needs to be seriously looked at. So I look forward to seeing hearing what the transportation person has to address this issue of north and south access on both sides of the Bank Street in terms of both of the developments that are proposed. They can't be looked at separately in terms of transportation.
Good
Hi,
point.
Mike. Miles cat.
Okay. Okay. So
Thank you.
Doug, and thanks, Carol. Great comments. Doug, we'll pass it to you, and then as you wish with handing it off to people.
Yeah, I'm actually wondering if we should do transportation right now and let Mark comment on the transportation stuff.
Okay.
Back into the architecture again after that, because on the chat too and noticing there's a pile of comments on transportation. And I certainly, all the comments about the cycling safety and the fact that the bike lanes are, as people have been correctly noted, will end at Bank Street, and we'll go from having nice cycle tracks that I think everyone is looking forward to, given the success of the ones on Main and other places in the city like MacArthur and Laurier, to just have those drop off and be left with a little bit of green paint and some sharrows on the bridge is clearly not an ideal situation. So unfortunately, that's outside of our development area, and we have very little influence over what can happen there. With that,
is there somebody on the team that can speak to transportation in general?
Yep,
though?
Mark is here. He will.
Oh, okay, yeah, because I mean, we're not gonna be able to say that it's not in our area to help solve that, because we're adding a lot of folks here potentially, and there's a huge safety issue that exists that'll be exacerbated by it. So we're going to have to address that through the development and the renewal of Bank Street. Of course, it's both a city and I think development responsibility to look at both of them. So we can't have one without the other. That area needs to be improved, and unless we do that, we can't move forward with something without any plans and just say, okay, we've already got 100 collisions over the last 5 years at Bank and Riverside. Let's add 100 more. Not gonna happen. So we're gonna have to work together on that piece. Mark, do you have some comments on that?
Yes, I do. So it's Mark Baker here. I'm from Parsons, and Parsons prepared the transportation impact assessment for this site plus the one across the street. So we're aware of both, and we've covered off both of them. So just a couple points on Carol's suggestion, or she identified or recognized that we're talking about more people. It's not all just about cars. So it's good to see that recognition that it's pedestrians and cyclists and cars and transit users, and so that's good. With regards to the Bank Street access, Doug mentioned a few minutes ago why it ended up on Bank Street. Just to build upon that, we did look very early on to try and gain access through the back door via the ramp that connects Riverside westbound and eastbound through the City of Ottawa property. And that was shut down pretty quickly and swiftly by the city. That was a no-go. So that left us with a few options, one of which was Bank Street. And just to emphasize that Bank Street access will be a right-in, right-out only. So that lessens the cognitive load for anyone trying to turn left at that location. So it's right-in, right-out only. So that's positive from a safety perspective. On the safety discussion, as part of the Bank Street renewal project, there was a safety audit completed for that entire corridor that extended from the Home Depot in the south end up to this intersection. We've looked at that safety audit, but the primary driver of that is the City of Ottawa safety branch, and Kathy Karuma from that branch is here, I believe. I think I saw her earlier, so she can speak to that safety audit and what the intent was and what the key findings were. But I can tell you that the findings of that safety audit were incorporated by the Bank Street renewal project and reflected in their current design. So that this section of Bank Street is going through what's called the detailed design. I personally have seen a copy, but I don't think it's for public consumption yet, the details of what that will look like. I think we all know it features wider sidewalks and unidirectional cycle tracks. I can tell you that there are special treatments for pedestrians and cyclists at each of the intersections of Bank and Riverside. The unknown, if I'll call it an unknown, is what to do on the north leg of Billings Bridge, because it is a 4-lane cross section, 2 lanes of traffic in each direction, and currently no room for active users in a meaningful way. So some creative solutions will need to be found to find a way to accommodate cyclists better across that bridge. So Kathy, I see you've been unmuted, so you're ready to contribute and talk about the road safety audit.
Yes, thanks, Mark. My name's Kathy Karuma. I'm in the road safety group in traffic services at the City of Ottawa. As Mark mentioned, there was a road safety audit conducted for the Bank Street Renewal Project. And the purpose of that audit is to identify any safety issues, risks, or concerns with the proposed design. So I'm not personally involved in that project, but I know that the project manager and the consultant on that design would take a look at the recommendations and try to incorporate any modifications into the preliminary design. So I understand that's underway at the moment, and there'll be a public consultation happening shortly with that project. So I think that's what I can add there, Mark.
Yeah, so I think that's going to be going out shortly to everyone in the area. Mid-April to the end of April is when there'll be a consultation on that Bank Street portion. But as has been pointed out in the chat, that study does not go through that intersection to the bridge. It stops there, that redesign. So there continues to be an issue, and the developers here in this area and the city are going to have to get together to work that out before this thing gets approved in any way, because we're not approving something with the safety standards that they are right now. So that has to be addressed, and it's untenable not to. So I'm just hoping that I kind of hear a lot of wishy-washiness about this. I'd like some commitment from the developer and from the city side. Of course, that's my end things as well, and I'm pushing on my end, but we need some commitment that this is something that has to be addressed through this process, whether that be cantilevers on the bridge, a redesign of that Riverside intersection, the wide pedestrian sidewalks that are needed here. Much wider than ODA standards. We need at least 5 in this case, given the height that we're talking about here. This is the sort of thing that has to be addressed through this process. I've met with city staff on this, and PIDE and economic development, and they understand the concerns. So Mark, did you want to add anything else? Because this is a huge concern that keeps coming up in my neighborhood.
Well, there's not much more that I can add, except that it's an ongoing dialogue, and the big challenge is certainly how to get peds and cyclists safely across the Billings Bridge. So that's there's not an easy solution. As I said before, it's going to require some creative thinking to make that happen.
Sorry, my internet's a bit choppy. I did catch you though. Thank you. Thanks for that. We're going to have to work very hard on that before we get to any approval stage here. So, okay.
Sean, I think you're breaking up a bit too much for the moment. I'm going to just going to go ahead and mute you for a second there, Sean. We're going to go to Q&A now. So folks, if you would please use the raise hand function, and then we can come to you as we see you on the board. I know a lot of questions were asked in chat. I think either Sean or I will try to touch on them if they're related to what speakers are saying. But please do just use your voice, use the raise hand function, and we'll do things that way. So I see James Russell has his hand up. Good to see you, James. I'm going to throw to you.
Hi. The question I have is just one general clarification. As I understand it, the developer is proposing that they have a right to a certain volume of building on that site under current rules. And what they're really asking for is to redistribute that volume of building, in effect, they would have to build a brick that nobody wants. So they want to turn it on sideways and into 2 towers. Now, would we have to go to the province to undo that idea? It seems to me bizarre that they would have a right to build a certain amount of space to fill that entirely at a given height. And that they're just proposing a modest sort of idea where they just, well, build it twice as high and therefore have it not fill the entire space. If they would have to come for a proposal to the city to change the height restriction, would we have to go to the province to change the total volume restriction?
So I'm going to suggest that perhaps JC clarifies there, and then somebody from the applicant can also comment.
Sure, thanks, Miles. So what the applicant is doing is simply using this as a justification towards the height. I don't think we are looking, they're not implying that they have any rights to get that height. They are simply using that argument as justification for the increase in height. And when you're talking about volumes versus height versus density, they're all not interchangeable, but I mean, they are not looked at differently from the province's perspective to get to that point. So I don't think that going to the province would settle anything.
Okay, and Doug, did you have anything you wanted to add?
I would actually turn it over to Barrett for the policy comment on that. I think he would be better to comment. But before I do that, I mean, again, I think what we're trying to do is we're trying to turn the density that we believe is the right amount of density for this project into the best form, both in terms of creating a livable ground plane and also creating a project that we can manage in 2 pieces and quality units.
Hey, Barrett.
Hi, Miles, I got booted out for about 20 seconds, so I missed the tail end of James's question, but I'm happy to contribute to a response if you can let me hear it again.
Well, James was saying that basically the argument in favor of increased height, it was framed as if it was as of right, that the developer would be able to build that much density. And so I think they were seeking for some clarification on 2 counts. One, just whether the province would need to intervene in order to change a newly established density or to allow for it, and 2, I guess just a further comment on why it's being proposed as of right.
Okay, yeah. So essentially, it's not really something in the province's hands. It really falls down to zoning, which is delegated. It's a municipal task where they'll establish the zoning on properties all across the city, and sometimes there's a lot of work and effort that goes into site-specific zoning for areas, and sometimes it's more of an exercise of higher level. This seems to be the one size fits all, or this zoning is most appropriate for this site. So in that perspective, it's a city thing. It's definitely not the province. And then in looking at it, if the city were to start having additional zoning regulations, which would further restrict or regulate that envelope or that volume of what can be permitted, I guess you start running into a territory where you're almost over-regulating in a sense, and it's easy. You look, oh, this is a planner for the developer saying this. Well, that's not the case. I mean, you don't want to over-regulate something to the point where someone who comes along and has the capacity, the resources to actually develop the land and give the community something that they are happy about, something that's desirable and appropriate. you really handcuff property owners if a site is overregulated. So to try and get to your point about adding certain extra layers of regulations to prevent that transition or that redistribution of mass, it's a fine line. And you don't want to discourage opportunity to achieve provincial and municipal objectives by overregulating. I hope.
Hey,
that,
Barrett, we're going to, thanks for that. And just apologies, folks. And thank you to Adrian. I was muted there for a second. Just thanks to Adrian Silnicki in the chat, who pointed out that the raise hand icon, if folks are unfamiliar, you can find it on the little tab at the bottom of your screen generally, the one that pops up with the chat and participants tab, or you can try to locate it using the little 3 dot buttons next to your picture or your cube on the screen. And the other thing I forgot to say before going into Q&A, and thankfully James Russell was a tactful speaker and was respectful in his comments. Please do continue the decorum that was set by James Russell and the community association leads. We very much appreciate that. Please don't hold back on your criticism, but communicate it in a respectful manner. And I see Sean Menard is back. Councillor Menard, welcome back after some internet troubles. I'm going to go to the next person on the list, Sean, unless you're wanting to take over now that you're back again.
No, please do carry on, Miles. I just want to recognize Sarah Loomis from Councillor Cloutier's office is also here as well. So good to have you here, Sarah. Thanks for listening in today.
Yeah, nice to see you, Sarah. Thanks. Okay, so I have Michelle Haddad next. I'm going to ask to unmute. Go ahead.
Yeah. Let me know if you can't hear me or whatever. And
you can hear you fine.
I live in Alta Vista. I did some work on the Bank Street CDP about 10 years ago, and when the zoning for those 2 nodes on Bank Street and Riverside Drive came up to be proposed to be 16-story towers, I was not happy, and I made my unhappiness known to the city planners at that point. I still think that the 16-story towers are too high, and that's a very, very complicated intersection. Everybody here has mentioned all the safety issues and the traffic issues that are involved in this intersection, this area of Bank and Riverside. So, and Doug, I believe you said that this land was purchased or something that's been in this company's name for over 20 years, perhaps longer. So I'm assuming that this was purchased a long time ago. And when the Bank Street CDP came along and established a 16-story height limit on these properties, I guess you were quite happy about that. So the question would be is that if the 16-story towers are allowed for this site, from what I understand from the planner I've been speaking to, is that you could probably put 2 16-story towers on this thing. But if the secondary plan says a 1 16-story tower on Bank Street and 1 8-story tower on Riverside, presumably the land has been cheap enough so that you could do that. So, and as somebody has just mentioned, it seems to be the density required for the site is the density that you would like to have. So can you comment on that? Why is not a 16-story tower plus an 8-story tower not appropriate for this site?
Thanks, Michelle.
Yeah, I'll just comment on the property acquisition first of all. When Bruno was talking about the property that was owned by the mall group, he was referring to the mall site. The parcels that we're proposing the development on currently have been acquired over the last, the most recent one about a year ago was the final kind of acquisition on it. So they're more recent property acquisitions. So since the CDP has gone into place. Regarding the question about density, the CDP and the secondary plan and the zoning bylaw define a maximum density for the site, and that's established by that 50-meter height limit. or roughly 16 stories, as you've correctly noted. And as I was talking about before, when we looked at options that fit within that, that height envelope, it was our feeling that the building that created was not the most desirable solution for the site, and hence us coming forward requesting permission to redistribute that density that is by right on the site into a building form that is, in our opinion, a better building form.
Okay, Doug, thank you for that. We're going to move to the next person now, and that's Donna. Donna, I'm going to ask to unmute.
Thanks, Dan. I guess a lot of people are talking about the density, and I don't want to harbor on it any long, too long, but I think most people are concerned with the tower height. And I appreciate that you're trying to make the design fit a smaller footprint and reduce your risk, build one building first and then the other. I can see, the purpose of that, but I'm just wondering, does that parcel of land that you have, why do you have to have those towers in that height? Like, what other options are there besides two very large towers? My concern with taking a variance is that it opens the doors for everybody else to have a variance as well. And all of a sudden you have all kinds of people building towers. You have a forest of them. So I'm trying to understand what are, this seems to be the only option. Like you just said, the other one was ugly. We don't know.
Thanks, Donna. Doug, do you want to take a stab at that?
I suppose I can. First, I'm going to just address really quickly a follow-up comment that Michael had in the chat there. And that is that we aren't asking for an increase in density on this this property from what would be permitted if we were to build that 50-meter height envelope in the allowable footprint. And just to go back to the comment of what is desirable in terms of a building form and what is not desirable. Earlier in the comments, there was some discussion about the potential for creating a wind tunnel on Bank Street and some reflection back onto the Richmond Road area near, I guess, the convent site, and that's an example, I think, where you see a development height observed strictly and rather than challenging a building form. And the result there is a really, really kind of uniform street wall on either side. And we saw, I think, a need on this site, given that it's a bit of a gateway site into a community, to do something a little bit different. So one of the moves we made there was to say, let's not develop a portion of the site above grade, and let's try to give that piece of the site back to being an open space. And so take that development density that we would have built on that portion of the site and move it onto the two tower portions to reduce those tower footprints as well. Just purely from a marketing standpoint, that means more corner units. So that's a desirable thing over having a bunch of units off of a long corridor. So, there's that component to it. Also, that opens up, it allows more sun onto Bank Street because we're not creating a really long block of a building that casts a shadow all day. There's more relief between the towers to allow those the sun to come in. So those are all kinds of little pieces that weigh into the equation of how we look at the density of a site and how we might manipulate that density and redistribute it into a different form than what might necessarily be prescribed as part of that secondary plan or a zoning bylaw. So I don't know if that answers that any better, but that's kind of what's going on in our heads when we're thinking about how we design a building to meet these needs.
Thank you, Doug. Yeah, I think that makes sense. I think, to be fair to Michelle, I think he realizes you could, in theory, build a short, fat building to achieve that density on site, but you probably wouldn't for various reasons, not just aesthetic ones. But we're going to move on to our next person in the audience with a question, and that's Jasmine.
Hey there. I'm not Jasmine, but I'm Jasmine's husband. Anyway, so my question is also more of a comment. Like I know we've spoken about safety and the implications of these large buildings and all the new people and all the new cars that it's going to bring to that intersection. But I guess I'm just wondering, like, does the architect have plans to, I guess, address this more thoroughly? Like it just seems like it should be at the forefront of the planning, I guess, all of the planning. Like who's going to want to walk to this site when you're stuck between these fast moving roads and these different intersections? Like it just seems like it wouldn't be a desirable area unless I guess the roads were addressed.
Thanks, Jasmine.
That's something I think we absolutely looked at in conjunction with the site. When I did my presentation, the reason I kind of led off with so much of the history and just dealing with that traffic is because that traffic kind of loop that was set up with the construction of the parkway, my feeling is that has significantly kind of encumbered the site for the last 60 years. It's made it a very challenging site to access. It made it less desirable to walk by. And just the volume of traffic that's going through there has really meant that the site has kind of slowly suffered, and the stores and stuff that were there initially have slowly disappeared. And so I guess the question is then what's changed, and why move ahead with the project right now? A big factor of that is the city's planned renewal of Bank Street, and the potential that offers for essentially to try to connect Bank Street South a little bit further north and make it more walkable. And because we're proposing a development that has roughly twice the number of units as it has parking spaces, we're relying very heavily on people who live here wanting to walk, wanting to bike, and wanting to use public transit. And so the project is, I guess, is a direct kind of beneficiary of the City of Ottawa doing the renewal of Bank Street. And in return, the project contributes back some livening of that street section in terms of addition of retail, addition of more pedestrian traffic past that area, the construction of the plaza. And as Sean was mentioning earlier, we on the project team fully want to work with the city to try to improve that connection further north. Because one of the things that is going to make this site even more desirable is if people do actually feel safe crossing Bank Street, particularly on bikes. Because the connections to the east and west are great. I mean, it'd be nice if they were better during the winter if you're on a bike. But really the missing piece is that section north across Bank Street. And so really it's in the project's interest that that we work with the city in improving that. And we really do want to see that improve, because we're investing a lot onto this site with the expectation that there is going to be a big uptake in pedestrian and cycling traffic as a result.
Okay,
so I hope that
Dan.
kind of answers the question there for you. But
So we're going to, I have two folks left that have their hand raised. I do see questions coming into the chat. So I can touch on those after the last two hands we've gotten to. So I'll go to Louise, then Christopher. So Louise, I'm asking you to unmute.
Hi there. So I live in Alta Vista, like off of Pleasant Park. So this intersection is really critical to how I get around the city. I was thinking, I just wanted to like understand a little bit better how it would work in terms of the phasing of the towers. So if you build the South Tower first, and then the location of the North Tower is not developed, would that space be open? Like, will you make like a temporary park there, or will it just be kind of like a temporary or like a medium-term construction zone? So I was just kind of like wondering about that. I do just want to say that I like the idea of like the parquet or whatever that you propose on the corner. And so I was just wondering if that would be like expanded basically during the phases. yeah, so that was my question and my comments.
Please.
I guess the answer to that one's going to depend a little bit on the timing of the projects and the uptake there. We'll build the south tower first, and during the construction of the south tower, that portion that will be the future plaza area will be used as a staging area for the construction. And then when we switch over to building the north tower, again, that park or the future plaza area will likely be used as a staging area again, unless we're successful in negotiating some space on the west side of the project. So it's quite likely, unless there's a significant gap in time between phase 1 and 2, that the plaza would be the last piece that would be finished in there. If there is a gap between the two, then I think it would probably be more reasonable to look at completing the plaza at an earlier time. But again, that's going to come down into a bit of the logistics of marketing and what the rental market does in the next few years.
Okay, thanks, Doug. We have Christopher, and then I'm going to summarize just a couple of things we've heard in the chat. Christopher, I'm asking you to unmute.
Perfect, thank you. I just want to take a moment to say thanks to the developer for making themselves available and this present.
Christopher, I believe we've lost you for a second there. Could you please restate?
Can you hear me?
We can hear you now.
Yeah, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yes, okay, perfect. So I want to say I like that area is currently inhospitable to pedestrians and cyclists. So I like this, the orientation you're bringing forward with pedestrian accessibility and a parkette and ground level retail. And there's a lot of questions about height. So I note right now across the street, we have 2 high-rise apartment buildings. There's one owned by Paramount, and then the other one's more of an L-shaped block. So those apartment buildings are very wide and long, but they're not necessarily as tall as the one that you're proposing. So I was just wondering if you could give an idea compared to those apartments. I don't know if you've looked into it. How many units are you proposing your towers compared to the ones across the street? Because the ones you're proposing are taller, but seem much more narrow. And I note this site isn't surrounded by, single family housing. It does have high rises already existing across the street, but just to get an idea of what's currently there and the capacity of those apartments in relation to the capacity you're proposing in your apartments. Thank you.
Thanks, Chris.
Sorry, you had me scrambling there for a moment to try to pull up my drawings so I could figure out the floor plates of those towers. The one that is kind of on the diagonal to Riverside and Bank Street there, I believe, if I recall correctly, is closer to about 13,000 square feet per floor plate. So it's roughly be about 1 3/4 times the floor plate to what we're proposing on the one of our towers. So it's a significantly larger plate. I don't know how many units are there because I don't know how many units are small, how many are larger ones. But just in terms of building area, it's I'd be guessing, but I'd say probably slightly larger than our bigger tower.
Thanks, Doug. Okay, so folks, there's been a number of questions in the chat about the issue of affordable housing. And so I'd just like to pose a question to you now based on several of the questions we've seen come in related to such. And, as Councillor Menard mentioned at the top of the meeting, this site would be subject to inclusionary zoning if it were in place, which it will soon be, but not quite on time with the new official plan. And in that scenario, for the folks who don't know, inclusionary zoning requires that new developments provide a certain percentage of units that are deemed affordable. And that's usually defined as either a certain percentage of the average income or a certain percentage below average market rent. I believe the provincial inclusionary zoning policy is the latter. But nevertheless, that policy is not in place yet. We'll know a lot more about it when it is. But there is a desperate need for affordable housing in this city and in our ward. There are folks trying to age in the neighborhoods they live in, and there are younger folks who are trying to stay in the neighborhood they grew up in. And and that's often unachievable for both groups. And so what percentage of affordable housing are we looking at this site, if any? And is CMHC financing being sought for this site or no? And finally, a related question to affordable housing is the number of 3-bedroom units or more in this building, as families often face a higher degree of unaffordability because of the lack of supply when it comes to multi-bedroom units in the core. So Doug, I'll throw that to you. Sorry, it was a 3-parter, but there you have it.
Doug, I can take that one.
I was just going to toss it your direction, Bruno.
So thanks for that, Miles. I kind of lost my page when I was doing my intro. So that's the affordable housing was something I wanted to sort of touch on because I figured it would be an issue, or not an issue, but a point of discussion. So we understand that that's a requirement. It's something that we're committed to do here at the site. The form of it and how it's managed, we haven't sort of perfected that. It's something that we have a lot of discussions on, both as a design team and an ownership team. So I don't have a definite answer on that, but for sure it's something that we'll know what we need to do, and it's something that we sort of want to do as part of this. On the unit mix, again, that's still something that we're working through. Again, it's very early stages as far as the design of the building. We're talking about building form. So that's something that, again, we're going to work through and perfect as we move towards the site plan application stage. And what was the third one again? Your third question.
It's you've sort of covered it. It's related to the CMHC financing.
Yeah. So the CMHC financing, again, we haven't sort of landed on the financing structure that we're going to use to develop the project. But yeah, I mean, we'll again, it's something we'll work through as we go through the process.
Okay, great. So Bruno, to be clear, it sounds like you folks are planning for some degree of affordable housing. It's just not clear how that's going to manifest yet.
Yeah, that's right. There's a lot of forms it can take. Yeah.
And there's an openness as well to family-sized units in the building. It's just not clear what the floor plans are going to look like.
Yeah, we have. Yes, we need to establish the form, and then we can figure that out. Yeah.
Okay, thank you so much for that.
Yeah.
Folks, I saw one question in the chat. We're going to wind down now. I did see a question in the chat about whether the applicant team would be willing to field questions directly if there's an email that somebody could put in the chat, or if they'd rather do that through the planner and our office, that's fine too, but just wanted some clarity on that. Feel free to drop a contact in the chat if you want. Applicant team, if not, I'll invite anybody who has questions. Actually, either way, anybody who has questions, please do let us know, because we're always interested to hear the answers as well and to hear the comments. JC already provided his email in the chat. I also pasted it in there. You can find his contact info regardless on our website. The event we posted for this contains a link to that information. And we'd appreciate being CC'd ourselves as well on these comments, because we will be finalizing our own sort of formal submission to the developer, because we definitely need to have several significant changes, we believe, on this site, as Sean's already alluded to. And thank you so much to everybody who came out tonight. It's a long meeting, we got a full 2 hours, so really appreciate that. The applicant team, city staff, and all of the residents. Oh, I see Sean Menard his internet is working. I don't know if you want to jump in.
I was here. I was lurking in the background. My internet was working. Well, now it says unstable. Anyway, just wanted to say thanks to everybody, and appreciate everyone being here. This is a really important one, this one and across the street. There's a lot of work left in these. So submit your comments into the city and to the developer. It sounds like we've got a developer that'll be flexible here. With some of the big issues that are coming up. And I know Doug cares about a lot of the same issues we do as well. So good to have an architect on the file that'll, again, be flexible on some of these aspects. But we're going to need to see some give to make sure that we get, the best result for community in this area. So appreciate everyone being here and the time. It was a 2-hour consultation, and there'll be more to come. So we'll follow up and make sure we capture all of your comments that you've put in the chat, and get more details out in our newsletter for you to see there. So thanks to everybody for being here.
Thanks, Sean. Thanks, Miles.
Have a good night. Thank you, Miles, for hosting.
Thanks, folks. Good night.